talk about two other areas. One of them being the fact that equity, requires a very good plan. When you go to any investor, equity requires to demonstrate that you either have some special technology, some patent, a good business plan based on which he enters your company. And that same thing becomes also kind of a con where basically he ends up owning, part of the company, so you stop owning 100% of the company. If you move back to debt, debt is basically a great option when you have visibility of cash flows or when you have some assets which you can kind of borrow against. But if you look at it, the most obvious thing is that this should be determined by what stage your business is at, what visibility is there of the cash flows, and also what kind of muscle power the promoter normally has in order to back up in the event of a default. The downside of obviously this thing is that most of the cases there's promoter liabilities attached, your personal assets are attached, and that's something that really needs to be thought about. While on the positive, the fact is that if you do well, you don't have anybody else to share the profits with. You have limited intervention from anybody. You can run the business the way you want. You can take the risks the way you want. And as I mentioned, it's a cheaper form of capital also because at the end of the day, the interest payments that you make are tax deductible. And this is something that a lot of people leverage a lot. I think SME is something that there's a lot of interest in of late. So I just thought I'll put up, what are the criteria for listing on the SME. There's been a major relaxation. There's a big initiative by the government also. They set up something called the MSMED, which is the Micro, Small and Medium Development Authority. And also they've pushed in the recent 2010 Prime Minister set up a task force asking for this SME listing, and therefore the exchanges accelerated this program. What they've done is they asked for you need a post-issue capital of anywhere between 1 crore to 25 crores. Net tangible assets of 1 crore, net worth of 1 crore, a track record of 2 years of profitability out of the previous 3 years, or else a net worth of 3 crores. If you look at the main board or the main exchange, it was basically 3 years of profitability out of 5, which they've relaxed over here. Even on the net worth and on the net tangible assets also there's a major relaxation. The difference over here is that there's a lot of concern on whether the company will be traded and will be liquid. So there's a requirement for the merchant banker who's taking the company public to ensure that there's 100% of the issues underwritten, out of which 15% has to be underwritten by him. And he has to commit to provide what we call market making or two-way quotes in the market for 3 years. And you need a minimum of 50 investors. So this is the major change. So, one of the things is that when you go public, there is less intervention, which is normally there, when a private equity guy sits in, because as he has a significant stake, he's a partner in your company. And the stock exchange allows you to diversify your customer base, so you don't have very large customers owning a large part of your company. Having said that, once you go public disclosure norms are very strong. SEBI is extremely active and they ensure that corporate governance standards are very high, just like private equity companies do. Quarter to quarter pressures are there. The market keeps looking at, your growth every quarter, and in this case, you'll be filing half yearly. So every half yearly, are you growing or not? So that kind of puts you at a risk of price movements. And when your company is small and there's a lot of price movements, it unnerves a lot of the customers, and customers get concerned that why is the price going down so much or going up. So this is just a quick word on the differences between the public and private equity investor base. What I've done, even if there is debt, it's again friends and family who've given debt, but there's really no organized debt that's available at that stage. When you go to the next phase, which is, you're just off the ground, you started doing well, or you're in the growth phase, that's typically when people access, venture capital on the equity side. And if you have orders and you have some tangible assets, then that's the first window you get for debt, which is working capital finance. It's short-term in nature and obviously has to be used mainly for the business. And we've seen that a lot of companies use that working capital for long-term requirements, which puts them in a big mess. So that's something avoidable. So therefore, funding through equity is really the preferred option. Once you come into the established stage, that's a point when you have visibility of revenues, you have visibility of cash flows. You started making some, as I mentioned, free cash flow. That's really the time when between established and expansion, that's really the time when debt becomes a great option. depending again on, what cycle, again, I'm generalizing, what cycle you're in the business, what industry you're in. In many cases, private equity is also very, very good, and that's when it's called growth equity. And then when you come into expansion mode, when you really want to grow the business, that point of time, again, private equity helps you take a much longer view. If you want long-term capital, they understand the industry, they have a lot of expertise, they can help you ascertain whether this acquisition will do well, or whether you're trying to expand into a certain territory or different product, whether that makes sense or not. And if you want to go for debt at that point of time, term loans are also available. And then the last phase of most companies is, after you've expanded and you're mature, then most people move into either a merger to grow, or they try to do an acquisition, and then many people don't want to continue, they go into exit mode. So at that point of time, again, in equity, you have private equity which is available. There are very large private equity firms which help support such acquisitions. And if you want to fund it through debt, then there is also something which banks provide called acquisition financing. So really, this is just a life cycle, and where debt and equity opens up for you. Starting from the top, these are companies where debt requirement is less, and if you find most IT companies that long-term debts are not that much. Most of their money, if at all, is in working capital, and they obviously are building intangible assets, so against which you can't really borrow money. And then as you start going down, you go into places like pharma, consumer goods, where again intangibles are through R&D or through brands, which you really cannot leverage again. Having said that, they still need fixed assets, manufacturing, so therefore they have more debt. And then you move down to infrastructure space again, which is heavily loaded with fixed assets, a good amount of working capital, but the cash flow visibility is more because you get steady streams of business. So therefore, again, the conclusion or the kind of note over here is that depending on which industry you're in, this is something that experts can advise you on in terms of what should be the right debt equity ratio you should follow based on your industry and based on the stage of your company. Just to kind of take this example forward, I've just put a case study over here, which in my mind is a great case study, even though it's a very large company. And the reason why it's a great case study is because it's a very good mix of both assets and services. Hospital businesses are about both, having assets and services. And I want you to focus really on the green bars really, and that's really the debt equity mix that they've used to grow. And they've actually grown in 15 years from 300 beds to 10,000 beds in a very short span through two routes. Obviously, they've used debt equity very nicely, and the other thing is your asset turnover again, which is another concept, which is about for businesses which are heavily into assets, whether you're really sweating those assets or not. So I'm just leaving those ideas with you. But this is just one company that I thought I'll talk about. I think the parting note really is that we're at a very unique time, and SMEs and small and medium enterprises are at a very important part. They add 8% of our GDP. They contribute to 40% of our manufacturing output, 45% of our export, which is coming. And we're at a very interesting stage in our life where the capital available in the country is much more than the number of entrepreneurs. There's so many private equity guys that want to invest. They want entrepreneurs to come out with great ideas. So if you have a great idea, we're at a cusp, which is, this happens once in the lifetime of a country, when countries have more capital than entrepreneurs. Second thing is opportunity is huge. The market wants, obviously, ideas which are new, creative, new business models to do the same old thing, like, for example, Flipkart, Snapdeal, figuring different ways to deliver the same thing. And capital is available, and capital is a good thing. How you leverage debt equity, what we call capital structure, is something that is going to make the big difference in terms of the returns of your business. And the last part is that, debt and equity are complementary. Banks, capital markets, private equity, they all are complementary. So it's not equity versus debt, but it's really a good mix of both. And the last note is it's better to have a small part of something big than to have, a big part of something small. And that's what really that last left-hand chart illustrates. With that, thank you.